Peace, peace. Yeah, peace is the Maji. How you doing? Trying to see. Okay, I think you all can see my screen. Yeah, welcome. Another sketching session, and it's going to be another fun one because we are dealing with the element of space, right? So I did a little bit for those of you who may have missed it. I guess I could unshare my screen for 1 second. I think that's it. Yeah, so those of you who were here, I did this painting. It's like a demonstration of texture, which I like this one. This one and this one I really like. So I actually did another one, basically off screen. And I like abstract stuff. So this is the other piece that I did off screen. I'll probably make a post or something about it. I wish I actually painted it on camera, but I didn't know where I was going with it. So this came from the texture study, which I'm really happy with, and I'm planning on doing some more like this. But yeah, I just wanted to show that off because I did not know how that was going to go. I don't do abstract stuff, but I think I like it. I like it. Peace. Oh, peace is Maria. Peace Himalaya, Saftanaya. So I am going to share my screen again. And we can get into some. I don't know why my computer doesn't like this program I use. Always disrespecting. Wow, it's not. Okay, I think I know what to do. Close this. And I'll open it again. Let's try that. There we go. So, okay. But how's everyone doing? How was your strong? How was your day? Yeah, how was your day? Did you get anything accomplished or anything done? Sovereignty said I missed it. I'm not sure if you're talking about the painting I was just showing, but that was done like throughout the strong. I didn't record that one. Oh, give thanks. It turned out well. Looks like acrylic paint pouring. That one I actually, that's the first time I did something without using a brush. I was using a knife palette, a palette knife palette knife exclusively. So I don't know if you can see this. I was using one of these, and I was just, scraping paint onto the canvas. Okay, so what are we dealing with today? We are doing space, right? And I kind of nerded out with this one because space is also an element of physics, right? And I don't know physics, but I'm really interested in it. So I took it as an opportunity to like combine physics and art. So what's the definition of space, right? It's our seventh art element. And if those knives can work wonders. I'm learning, I'm learning. So space is a continuous area or expanse which is free, available, or unoccupied, right? And what I like about space, why the title of the segment is Space and Time, is because space is closely related to time, and time is closely related to speed. Right, so they're all interlinked together. Another definition of space is a period of time, distance, an interval, a stretch of time. So you can say like in the space of an hour, or you can say it's a day's journey from here. So you can also relate space very closely to distance and time, or velocity. Distance is how far two objects are from each other. So, for example, if I have, let me make sure this is visible. Okay, so if I have one object here and I have another object here, to increase the flow. Yeah, I have one object here, another object here. I can say this is the distance between those two objects, right? But I have to have two objects, right, in order to measure the distance between them. If there's only one object, then there's no need to measure anything because you're not going anywhere, right? The time it takes to get there, of course, and the velocity is the distance and the speed. I mean, the speed that you can travel a distance, right? Velocity can also be related to direction, but it's mainly the speed of the object that's traveling, and time is like the seconds, minutes, and hours that you have in your calculation. Whether it took you 7 hours or you have 3 days, you have units of measurement as well. Like you traveled 6 kilometers or 8 kilometers. But yeah, and this is very important when you're dealing with space because in order for you to understand where objects are related to one another and even how many objects you need in a space, how closely or far away you need them linked together, it's all very important for what it is you're trying to achieve. Peace is the ethic, right? So I have a bunch of notes and I did not write them in order. So I'm going to try and go over them very briefly, but in order, right? So you also have scale, and your scale is basically you're measuring the distance without necessarily scalar distance. I'll say it more specifically. You're measuring the distance without really taking into account which direction it's going in. It could be going up, down, left, right. It doesn't matter. The distance is the distance, right? And then you have displacement, and that takes into account like both the size and direction of an object. It also takes into account like the changes in the position, right? It's looking at size and direction based on the change in position. So if I'm looking, they typically use these things for like astronomy. Like I'm trying to measure the space between Saturn and Pluto, right? The size of the objects help me to understand how quickly they're moving. You um, it's very, very, very closely related with the concept of motion by measuring the change in distance. Let me go to the screen. So by measuring the change in the distance, I can see how quickly something's moving. So if I look at something and it's here, right, and then I turn around for 5 seconds and I look back and it's here, and it's like, wow, it's really moving, right? Until you realize that, let me make this bigger. Until you realize that this space right here is a distance of, make that smaller. This space is a distance of, I don't know, 2 feet, right? If it moves from here to here in like 10 seconds, then it's not really moving that fast, right? You take a whole seconds to move 2 feet, that's nothing, right? But what if I change this to say this is actually 200 feet? Say, wow, though, that thing must really be moving quickly, right? How do I a couple of questions that artists can ask is, how do I depict something that's moving very quickly? And how do I depict scale, right? To say something is really, really, really large, right? And or a really wide expanse of space. So these are a couple of things that I'm gonna try to explain in theory before we get into more practical stuff. I guess I can leave that there as an illustration. Let's make it a little smaller. Leave it up there. Okay, so a couple more things about distance. How do I, yeah, UI, get rid of that. So of course we know that speed is the rate of change of distance with respect to time, and the difference between speed and velocity. I'm trying not to use them interchangeably because speed just looks at A to B. Velocity takes into account where A is and where B is in terms of the direction of the motion. Is it going up? Is it going left or right? You know, things like that. Distance and time are interconnected in physics, because by measuring the change in distance over time, we can determine the speed and velocity of an object. And yeah, I'll just say that some of this is kind of redundant, right? But that's distance in a nutshell from a physics standpoint, right? You want to measure, in order to measure the distance of something, you need to look at the speed an object is moving and the amount of time it takes to get from one point to another point. That lets you know how fast it's going, or even how much distance it has to cover. You know, because you could see a very small Ferrari like moving very quickly, but if it's a large space, it's going to look like it's not moving at all. Um, in art, we have three types of space, right? We have what's called white space. We have positive space. Well, it's kind of four, but these two are very closely related. But I'll go over them separately. Positive, negative, and the other one is dimensional space. Right. So let's start with white space first. So white space is everything on my screen that is not black. Right. That's the simplest way to explain it. It refers to your blank canvas, the blank canvas itself, as well as the space in between objects, right? So if I say, let me move this. If I erase this line here, like the line is just to help us, but the line doesn't exist, right? There's not a line between you and your kitchen, a visible line, or a visible line between you and your bed. But you do draw that line in your mind sometimes. Like you imagine where you want to be, and then you just walk that line, right? So this is the distance between these two objects or points. And let's still say it's 200 feet. So that white space is everything that's not being used up or everything that's not being occupied. And it can also speak to the space that the artwork is sitting at. So it can speak to the environment. It can speak to how things are arranged. So, for example, I may have a white space. I'll draw a little box here. Oops. All right, so this is my white space. and these are my borders that define my space, right? Everything in here is unoccupied, but if I say I want to add a tree, I've just removed something from my white space by doing that, right? But I can also say I want multiple trees, so I want another tree here, right? And I want one over here. Yeah, I know it's a crude drawing. Only thing I'm missing is the little sun in the corner and a house. But here we have very little white space. Let me use a different color. We have very little white space in between here. And here we have a large expanse of white space. All of this can be considered white space. This is important when it comes to how crowded an image looks and your composition, which we will get into later, right? So that's your white space in a very basic sense. There's a lot more to white space that's super important. And we'll see how that works when we're dealing with patterns and balance and composition and rhythm and so what have you, right? So next we have positive and negative space, and believe it or not, I've already done it, right? Because you start out with white space, and our goal is to fill that white space with positive space. Positive space is the shapes you draw. So I just added positive space in the shape that I just drew. And if I do this, then I just created a hole in the white space, right? In this sense, the white space would be considered negative space, right? Because there's space that I drew on and the space that I didn't draw on. Before it was just totally white space. Now there's something to compare it to, right? So there's white space and there's black space, or positive and negative, right? Because I could have I drew a red line just now. That was positive space. So you want to look at the relationship between positive space and negative space, and you can do a lot of really cool things with negative space. There are lots of works of art. I've typically seen it in like I've seen it in a lot of logo designs, right? And I got a couple of examples of really cool use of negative space. I'll start with some stuff that's more familiar to you. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this one. This is the NBC logo, but their mascot is a peacock, right? And I had never seen that there was the shape of a peacock inside. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but right above the letter B, there's the shape of a peacock, right? A peacock's face. You can see it near the top, and all of those little I used to call them round pizzas. But all of those little round pizzas, all those those points are actually the peacock's feathers, right? So you can see a good example of negative space there. An easier example of negative space is with the FedEx logo, and you can see they draw it for you. On the right hand side, you can see that someone filled in the negative space with purple just so that you can see the arrow that's created between the E and the X. On the left hand side is the actual logo. And once you see the arrow, you can't unsee it. Okay, so that's another example. And here's another one. It's the word run, right? I'm not going to say anything. Who can tell me what the negative shape is, or which shape is created by negative space? I'll give you all a couple of seconds because according legend says that there's a delay, and I'm trying to see how real that delay is. Okay, Sister Yafa gets it. Right, there's a leg and a foot between the R and the U. Exactly, right? So that's negative space. All I did was fill the space around the foot, you know. Let's try another one. This one should be easy. There's a bear, right? And then we got another one. Points for whoever gets it this time. Okay, I ain't seeing nothing. Okay, there we go. Yeah, cue the shining music. There's a knife. Oh, I can't get the one to use Sister Alfred. That's an easy one. It's spelled out. And these two are pretty easy too. You have music, and you have a wolf, right? But all of these are just examples to show you that you can do a lot with negative space. You can draw something that can be both positive and negative as well. Like so many optical illusions that I'm sure many of you have seen. Right? And one thing that illustrates is that you can't create one thing without destroying another. In order to occupy a space, you have to remove the possibility of there being empty space, right? And yeah, I think it's really clever the way people make use of. Um, I think it's really clever the way people make use of negative space. So next up, right, we've covered white space, we've covered positive space, negative space. Dimensional space is what a lot of people can make space of that as well, right? This helps us to make things seem three-dimensional, right? Your dimensional space is dealing with height, length, and depth, right? Let me spell them out. Ugh. All right, height, length, and depth. And this helps us to measure dimensions. It's the same thing people use in construction. Um, our issue is we have the height and we have the length. Whoops. Oh no, what have I done? Okay. Whew, scared me like that. Okay, so you have the height and you have the length, or sometimes it's called the width, right? But you do not have the depth, right? You need to be able to create the illusion of depth. How can we do that if we got a flat surface? Well, we know that we can use our values to do it, right? But sometimes we can also use shape to do it. And you can do that in several ways. You can overlap a shape, right? So let's say I got this big circle here, and I want to make it look as though there's an orange sitting in front of another orange, or an egg, whichever one I draw first. I can do this in a couple of ways. I can make the egg much larger than the orange, and that will make it seem much closer to us. But I can also overlap the orange, right? And in order to overlap it, I can fill in the egg or I can just erase bits of the orange. And now we can see that, well, I can make it a little bit clearer. A little bigger. Now we can see that this orange is in the background. And we got an egg in the foreground. There we go. There we go. You got egg in the foreground, orange in the background. Voila. And this creates an illusion of three-dimensional depth as well, right? Because, well, there's something else that I could do, but I'll skip that for now. But utilizing that level of depth, and I can also get away with it with a lot of shading as well. But yeah, that's one way to establish the illusion of depth by overlapping things. Of course, another way is increasing and decreasing the size or the relative size of objects. I can even shift your perspective, right? Or let's say, I don't know if I can do it with this one. Yeah, I don't think I'm good enough to work with Photoshop in that sense yet. But I can change up the focus of something as well, right? I think I got some images just in case I can illustrate that. Okay, so when it comes to focus, right, we have images like this. Can I make that full screen? Oh, I can remove this. And I don't know how to turn off my camera. Duh. All right, hopefully you guys can see that. Well, it's blurry in front, and the further it goes back, it's much blurrier. It's sharp in the front, I'm sorry. But as you go back, it's much blurrier. The Blade logo takes the cake. Yeah, I liked it too. Does the color of an object in the foreground make a difference? Sort of, yes, because the colors in the foreground are usually much darker than the ones in the background. So the further it goes back, the darker it gets, right? And you can see that a lot when it comes to how you look at the spaces. You have your foreground, you have your middle ground, and you have your background. And your background is typically lighter than your foreground, right? So I'll show you what I mean with another image. There you go. So as you can see, when we covered colors and light, we had spoken about ambient light and diffuse light and direct light, right? And we had covered that the more direct your source of light is, the more vibrant it's going to be. But there's also ambient light. Ambient light exists because light does not just hit an object and then stop. It keeps moving. So it's going to bounce from object to object to object. And eventually, every time it bounces from an object, it loses energy. So you can see with the light in the background, all of that is a bunch of light that has lost energy, right? It hasn't lost energy, but it's become hazy because you have so much beams of ambient light, like crisscrossing and intersecting over one another, right? So the further away it goes, the lighter it gets. The closer it gets to you, the darker it gets, right? Or the more vibrant it gets. This is another image that can help out with that. And you can see how faded the building in the back looks. And you can see how bright and vibrant the young man's top is looking. Right. But this also helps you to measure distance because you also have relative size, right? So those hedges are getting smaller and smaller as they go in the background. But because of how large that building is versus not only the shrubs, but also the people standing in front of it, you get the sense that this is a very large object. And even though the young man is closer, you get to see how small he is relative to that object, even though there's an distance there, right? And you can see with those, with the, I guess it's a pond. I don't know what you call a body of water, but you can see that the edges closest to the boy, they start getting closer and closer the further and further they are. The points get closer and closer to one another the further and further they get away from the boy. Let me see if I can demonstrate that. So you have the young boy who is like, let me do that, that, and that. I'll actually use this space. Whoops, I want to get rid of that. What? So if I wanted to illustrate the little boy, let's say this is him. I don't know, a little weird. Okay, so that's your little boy there. This is the body of water he's standing in front of. And this would be what's known as a vanishing point. The vanishing point or perspective helps us to almost look into the distance, right? Your vanishing point is basically the point at which an object that you're looking at, whether it's 2D, one dimensional or two dimensional, it seems to disappear, right? So you have these two objects that are really close. But they'll seem to almost vanish. I'm really trying to get the hang of this thing. They'll seem to almost vanish in the distance. And that helps us to know that this is our horizon. And stuff can be in the back here too, like mountains or buildings or whatever. I don't have any space. But you can tell that this is something that is going into the distance. Right? Yeah, look at me in water. Yeah, you can tell that something is going into the distance. That's what our perspective is for. That's the depth part of the whole equation. And the depth is an illusion. The whole thing is an illusion, but especially the depth, because you can pick up your paper and you can just turn it around, look behind it, and you won't see a road or a waterway jetting from behind the picture. So obviously it's an illusion. Willfully, that helps. I tried making a road once, but the fade and proportions were not right. It looked like a road to an explosion. That's funny. Okay, so there we have our three types of space, right? We have white space, we have positive and negative space, and we also have dimensional space. And we can have some fun with it, because there's lots of different adjectives that can help us to arrange objects in a space, which is essentially what our composition is. We're arranging objects within a space. And let me move some of the stuff out the way. Oops, wrong space. Okay, so let's say we have a space, right? And I don't know, for the sake of give me you put an object in the chat, something that could be arranged, something that typically doesn't um, come as a single object or on its own. I'm just trying to make a point for or a case for arranging objects. So while someone is putting it in the chat, I'm just going to say a lot of times when composition is taught, it's taught in the context of photography or cinematography, where like you ever open one of those fancy digital cameras and you try to take a picture, and you typically see some squares. It's not a straight line. It's definitely not a straight line. Right? So you see something like that. Um, that's basically a grid that designed to break up the screen of whatever camera you're using into thirds, right? So the thirds horizontally and the thirds vertically, right? So if you're going from left to right, it's one third, one third, one third, and then if you're going from top to bottom, one third, one third, right? And you add all of them up, you get a singular screen. But you have these intersecting points. Let me use a different color. So you have these intersecting points here, 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 and here. And what these intersecting points help us with, they're not like hard rules, but they help us with our compositional choices. So you already know that anything residing in one of those 4 points on the screen, it will be a good place to place your focal point. You may even decide to center it, right? I can do this too. Let me see. All right, so let's say this is Jimmy, right? Jimmy crack on and he doesn't kill. So if you ever need someone to look up to, be like Jimmy, right? So you can center Jimmy. I can move this around now. You can center him. You can place this third over this eye, to create a certain level of composition. You can have him at the bottom of the screen like so. He can be over here like so, and some stuff could be in the background. And he can also be over here, right? When it comes to composition and spacing things, you don't want the person to be looking off screen and have a bunch of empty space behind them. Wherever they're looking, you want to have some white space in front of them so that it looks like they're looking towards something, right? And there's a lot of other photography stuff that I learned from here and there. Some people I know, photographers, I learned a lot about composition from photography and movies and stuff like that. Like anytime you watch a movie, you'll notice that their eye is either here or it's here, or they're like here and then they flip the screen and the other person's face is like here or something like that to make it look like they're facing each other, and they would just flip between those. Like two cameras would be sitting behind each person, and they would just switch back and forth between the cameras, right? But Jimmy don't care about none of that. You don't need to talk to no one. All right, so grapes. What is Waterloo? I don't know. I don't know what they look. Aha. So I think I also had a skewed or off-centered focus when I tried to draw the road. Okay. Yeah, willfully you don't cause any more explosions. Okay, so what else did I want to cover? Right, because there's so much to spacing and composition. So let me get into these grapes, I guess. Grapes seem easy enough. So you say goodbye to Jimmy for now, right? But let's say this is a bunch of grapes here, right? Oh, I gotta make a new, yeah. This is a bunch of grapes here. It looks messy. Looks messy, isn't it? Yeah, but this is your bunch of grapes here. Oh no. And they come like that. And let's say I want them to be in a bowl, right? So I'll imagine they're in a bowl. And when it comes to space as well, you can use um, sort of I don't call it a rule, but there's a tip that you should draw through an object. Like if I wanted to draw a bowl, I shouldn't like draw it here and then come on the other side and try to draw it here. Right? I should just draw through the whole thing and then erase what I don't need. Right. So I want this um, bunch of grapes to be inside the bowl. Right. I don't want it on top of the bowl. I don't want it floating above the bowl. I want it to be inside the bowl. Right. So I'm going to draw through it. And I'm going to draw the bowl. Right. So that's my grapes in a bowl. And that's really all I need to start with. And I've been trying to work on, not trying to, but I've been working on this urge to make sure my first sketch or my first draft is perfect. Your first sketch is just that. It's just a sketch trying to get your idea on the page. I remember this. I don't know if she was training for the part, but it was a TV program. It was a little while ago, maybe the 90s or the late 80s, and Cicely Tyson was giving some information on writing and grammar, and she had said that one of her teachers taught her, don't worry about fixing your writing mistakes or editing your grammar or anything in the beginning stage. Just focus on getting your ideas on the page. Once you get your ideas on the page, you can call that a draft, and then you can go back and work on it. But if you try to make it perfect, you'll only frustrate yourself, and the experience is going to be less fun, right? So that's my draft. Got a bowl full of fruit, bowl full of grapes, and I'm going to erase. Oh, eraser too big. Okay, I'm going to erase the things that overlap. And I know what to erase because the bowl is going to be in the foreground. The grapes are going to be in the midground, and the back of the bowl is going to be in the background. So I can erase this as well. Okay. So that lets our audience know that everything that is in the bowl is in front of the background, and everything that's cutting off the view of the grapes is in the foreground, right? And then I could also do stuff like the horizon line, right? When I'm drawn through, I really gotta get used to this. I still haven't gotten completely used to digital medium yet. And I can also add some other stuff, maybe a lot of shadow. Okay, cool. So that's my bowl of fruit, right? Or my bowl of grapes. Any grapes? There we go. Bowl of grapes, right? And you can see like just by adding those things like oops, shadows and highlights, you can make something that seems like a messy drawing really stand out. And with the grapes, all you gotta do is add a little bit more value. And voila, you got a bowl full of grapes. Right? And your composition can tell you, okay, that's cool, but what if I want grapes and some other fruits? Or let's say I have a composition with some people, right? Remember when your parents used to take you to take pictures for no apparent reason? They'd just be like, put on some good clothes and get in the car, and the photographer would just spend half an hour getting you all to sit in a certain place, try 3 or 4 different times, and they don't know how to compose people. Um, but they're dealing with composition, right? And you're dealing with composition with a bunch of people who may not be familiar with what composition is. So they're tilting their head left and right, they keep fidgeting. Um, but let's say I want a good composition, right, to see the family, on a good family photo. Um, and maybe it's just yeah, maybe it's just the males in the family. So I may have father head, little big head son, can't hold his head up properly. And then let's say the oldest boy over here, right? Father's arm is on his shoulders, right? So that's a basic composition, right? I have an empty space in, right? I have an empty space in the middle here. I got the big head little boy over here. And there's a sense of weight because he's much smaller than his brother who's standing up. Even though he's on a lower elevation, he doesn't offset the father. So the father's not tilted like that. He's balanced. Right? And it's all straight down the middle, even if the sun is still off to the side, you just gotta catch him. Yeah, and all kind of squiggly lines. You can catch him here, right? In the rule of thirds point, and he'll be good. And the father would be in the center. Um, the brother would be over here, but it's close enough to that third line going across. And you can do a lot of other stuff too. There's also compositions that take advantage of discordance. So let's say if I have a bunch of, I don't know, bunch of rocks, right? And they're all just set up. We use the thirds again. They're all just arranged very nicely. The one that I want you to focus on doesn't necessarily need to be in one of the thirds. It just needs to stand out from the rest, right? So you call this discordance. And immediately, no matter what you do, um, your eyes are always going to focus on it, right? So I could take that off, put it back on, take it off, put it back on. Why is it showed up? Okay, there you go. And immediately your eyes are going to go to the red one because it's the only red thing on the screen, right? And you can play around with that too. There's some compositions I saw. I don't have it now. Maybe I'll have it next time. Where you see it's like an ocean of umbrellas walking on the street, right? Ocean of umbrellas. Let me see if I can be patient enough to draw enough umbrellas to make this point. And then all of a sudden, in a sea of black umbrellas, you see this red umbrella, right? And it makes a big impact. So I'm sure your sisters can attest to it who are in the room where you may wear your clothing that way. You know, all of your clothing looks a certain way, and I don't know, you wrap your hair up in something that's different from everything else. So it could draw attention to your face or whatever type of witchcraft you'll be doing. But yeah, you know, that's a couple of basics on space. I was trying to just get all of those definitions out of the way so that when I make reference to them when I'm working next strong, it'll be easier to just follow along. Yeah, but you have other terms too. You have discordance, you have things that are symmetrical, like all of these are symmetrical, they're equal on both sides. You have things that may be asymmetrical, right? So you have these circles. Yeah, those are symmetrical. Then you might have things that are asymmetrical. All right, man. You have things that are orderly, like this one here. And then you have things that are all over the place. Right. So those would be scattered or dispersed. You have all kinds of things that you can do with your ordering of your shapes. And these are all aspects of composition that we'll be covering next strong as we go through this final art element in our 7 art element series. And I probably have to do this again because you always got to go back to basics at some point, you know, just to help you to understand where there's certain gaps in your knowledge. I like going over basics. Sometimes I like going over them too much and I don't make stuff. So I'm also working on balancing that out in the near future. But before I just start rambling and doodling, I'm going to let you guys get out of here. Hopefully, you all learn something and you know you'll be able to utilize it in your drawings or sketching or any of your artistic endeavors. As always, Master Menelek, and I'm wishing you all a good night and a good strong. Right. See you all next Tuesday, same time. Peace, everyone. Thanks.